Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Wednesday, May 15th, 2013, hump day, middle of the week, starting that long, slow glide down to Powwow on a Friday. We have got a lot of stuff. It's a very busy news day. A lot of stories are breaking right now. Phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Manny's in our control room twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Just looking at the corporate media, Jake Carney is back up there, standing in front of the press with his hair on fire, promising them that he cannot smell any smoke. And the story is just changing back and forth, from day to day. It's a completely different story, and if you are a loyal American, you will believe what we're telling you today and forget about what we told you yesterday, or otherwise the terrorists will win, and so forth and so on. Today is the 65th anniversary of the Nakba, which is a word that means basically the calamity, and it's a commemoration of when the creation of Israel inside Palestine resulted in the Palestinians being driven out of their homes and into exile. And it's kind of weird because Israel does everything they can to keep alive the memory of the legend of World War II, and yet they've tried everything they can to erase the memory of the Nakba. They've even actually passed laws prohibiting commemoration or mentioning it. They're just trying to erase it completely from history. Obviously, it's not working. Now, we're looking at all these gates that are piling up all over the White House, and I imagine there's a huge amount of panic going on, and the fingers are pointing back and forth, and the mud is beginning to fly, and they've obviously lost control of the situation. Let's start, of course, with the Internal Revenue Service, and the plot is thickening over the enemy's list. ABC News has obtained a draft of a soon-to-be-released report showing that the IRS was targeting conservative groups, Patriot, Occupy Movement, Tea Party, as far back as March of 2010, and the senior IRS officials in Washington have known about it for almost 2 years. Now, the official line out of both the IRS and the White House is the IRS did this all on their own. Obama had no idea it was being done, and if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's weapons of mass destruction to sell you. And that's the new official line, saying, oh, it was these rogue appointed officials, and they just did it all on their own. And, of course, I don't think anybody's going to buy that one. I mean, Richard Nixon was saying exactly the same thing about the Watergate break-in. I had no idea what Creep was doing, and so forth and so on. There's a new wrinkle to the scandal, however. There is an investigative journalism group called ProPublica that has gone public. It's a liberal group, and it's gone public saying the Internal Revenue Service gave confidential documents of these conservative groups to this liberal journalism group in order to hand them ammunition to use to go out and attack these conservative groups publicly. And ProPublica is saying it's obvious that the documents the IRS was handing them were not supposed to be made public. And the IRS just handed it to them. So tell me again how we're supposed to trust the IRS with our medical records. So this thing is not going away here at all. Let's see. Now, moving right along. It turns out that individuals were targeted by the IRS. Not just groups, not just the Occupy Movement, not just the Tea Party. Apparently in St. Louis, Larry Connors, who's a veteran local news anchor at KMOV Channel 4, is saying the IRS started targeting him after an interview he conducted with Obama in April. Because apparently the interview was not softball enough, and now he is saying, he's out there in public saying the IRS is targeting him as well. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. We'll be right back with this mess. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the Internal Revenue Service basically taking confidential documents from these conservative, patriot, Tea Party groups and just handing them over to a liberal news organization who, to their credit, went public on this, saying the IRS is handing us records that are not supposed to be made public, and this should raise very serious questions regarding Obamacare. Can the IRS be trusted with your private medical records? The answer is obviously no. And last March, over at healthcarenews.com, They had a story on how the IRS is facing a class action lawsuit over the theft of 60 million medical records, including the medical records of all California state judges? How does this even relate to the idea of raising revenue to give to the Federal Reserve? And the answer is it doesn't. The IRS is just engaged in this massive data collection operation. And that's really what they're doing here. Now, everybody is pointing fingers at Barack Obama and the IRS, but the fact of the matter is, and this is over at U.S. News and World Report, 2 years ago, Senate Democrats were openly advocating having the IRS give intensive scrutiny to any conservative, patriot, Occupy groups. And it's there. It's a systemic problem. It is a systemic problem out there. And, of course, Orrin Hatch was trying to deny it, but we know what was going on there. And so, everybody's kind of guilty, and now they're pointing fingers at it because, remember, having the IRS give additional scrutiny or reduced scrutiny to any subgroup is a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution, whether that is more intense scrutiny for conservative Tea Party patriot groups or backing off audits and investigation of the too-big-to-fail corporations, which we know has also occurred. And it's all driven by politics. The IRS is completely politicized. It's not being used as a tool for supporting the economy. It is a tool of political repression. It's a weapon in the hands of an out-of-control, paranoid president. And there is definitely a bias in the way it's been handling their applications for nonprofits. The IRS was speedily approving tax-exempt status for liberal groups while holding the Tea Party and other conservative patriot groups in limbo. A review of their records shows that the average wait time for a liberal group to get their tax-exempt status was about 90 days. The Tea Party went for 27 months waiting for a tax-exempt approval and did not get it. This is reported in USA Today. Even more damaging, Lois Lerner, the senior IRS official at the center of this firestorm about targeting Tea Party groups for burdensome tax scrutiny, signed a tax-exempt status for a foundation run by Obama's half-brother that had been apparently prior to that operating illegally for years, and they got their tax-exempt status in 1 month, 30 days. So this whole thing is just, it's completely out in the open. The IRS is not about raising money to support the government. It is a tool of political oppression. And it's all driven by politics. If you are a buddy of the administration and support their agendas, you're cut all the slack you need to run your business and make money and become a money junkie. And if you stand opposed to the policies of the government, you will be hammered over and over and over again and kept as poor as possible so you cannot stand up and oppose what the government is doing. That's basically the agenda right there. Now, the people trying to defend the IRS are reaching to some rather extreme lengths. I heard this quote on Fox News today, where a Democrat, and I didn't get the name of the Democrat, but this was actually on Fox News, said it was appropriate for the IRS to target conservative groups because conservative groups have become the Taliban of American politics. That's how desperate they are to keep this thing under control. And, of course, a lot of people are saying, why was the Tea Party and the Occupy movement and all these little political dissidents and this TV anchor in St. Louis singled out for abusive tax processing harassment, for lack of a better word, when they have just shoestring budgets? It's not like there's a huge amount of money involved and they're going to be defrauding anybody of any significant amount of money. But since the Citizens United decision came down, you have all of these foundations that were set up with anonymous donors that are funneling billions and billions of dollars into the corporate media to influence the political system. Nobody's examining their tax-exempt status. And maybe that would have been a better use of the IRS time. And it gets even worse than that. Apparently there was, down in Tennessee, there was this lawyer was trying to get a tax-exempt status for a mentoring group that trained high school and college students about conservative political philosophy. The IRS wrote back asking for a list of every single student the group had trained or planned to train. The IRS has no business asking for that information. It is completely irrelevant to the issue of whether you are a tax-exempt organization or not. They're just gathering data. Now, Dick Morris is out there, and he's absolutely right. Using the IRS against your enemies is an impeachable offense. It was one of the articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon. And apparently Dick Morris has also come out saying that the IRS was auditing all of Mitt Romney's donors during the presidential campaign. That is also harassment. Now, Attorney General Eric Holder is out there screaming there has to be a criminal investigation into the IRS targeting of the Tea Party and conservative groups. Holder doesn't care about the IRS or the Tea Party. He is trying to basically use the IRS scandal to distract the media and the world from his own problem, which is the looting of the phone records of the Associated Press. And it must be, call it dueling scandals. That's really what, I need to get my banjo out here and do dueling scandals as they flip back and forth here. And like I said yesterday, it's got to be a major shock for the corporate media to all of a sudden find themselves on the same side as the independent media regarding the abuses of government. This may be a wonderful opportunity for the corporate media and the independent media to kiss and make up, because we're both on the same side of this issue, and we are united in the common cause of press freedom and the First Amendment. So it's time for a little handshake on that one here. Eric Holder went even further in talking about the Department of Justice seizing these press records. Eric Holder has come out and said he isn't actually sure how often reporters' records are being seized. Just, yeah, it's happening. We don't exactly know where it's going. Well, we know what he's saying. It happened to other news organizations other than Associated Press. If it was a real national security investigation, they would have been targeting individual reporters that they thought were doing something that violated the law, which is really what it comes down to. But they cast a wide net all over Associated Press. And they probably were casting an equally wide net over all of the other corporate media. I still think the only reason the Department of Justice informed Associated Press that their phone records had been looked at was in the hope that it would chill the corporate media, scare them into silence, just stay in their little cubicle in the office and just take the government handouts and report that as news. And if that was what they were thinking was going to happen, boy, has that backflashed on them. The corporate media is incensed, and they have every right to be. So it looks like this scandal probably reached farther than Associated Press. Remember when that whole phone tapping scandal broke out in Great Britain? Rupert Murdoch was tapping celebrities' phones and tapping into their communications, and it kept growing and growing and growing. I think that's what's happening right now. The announcement of the Department of Justice that they had gone in and looked at the Associated Press's phone records was a message to the corporate media. Don't embarrass the administration, or we are coming after you. And the reaction to that has been absolute fury, because the vast majority of the corporate media, and this is why we criticize them, usually toe the line, put out the government pronouncements as actual news, support corporate financial agendas in their reporting. Remember the Fox synthetic bovine growth hormone lawsuit. And after decades of loyalty and going along with the system, to be treated like this by the White House, what a slap in the face that is. After just constantly supporting, oh yes, Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, and yes, the economy's just about to turn around, and oh, Syria's Assad is bad, and we've got to invade. And then all of a sudden, these corporate media people are realizing they're being treated like potential terror suspects, right alongside us in the independent media. What an insult that is. It's rather amazing that nobody in the White House realized they were going to get this kind of a gut emotional reaction from the corporate media. Like I said, I think the real agenda from the White House, as Benghazi and the IRS scandal started to explode, they figured, we'll just scare the corporate media into staying silent, and this will only be covered by those wacko tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy wacko kooks, anti-Semites out there on the independent media, and nobody will pay attention to them. Well, wrong. That was a really bad judgment call. Meanwhile, Eric Holder is trying to dump the blame on this on his deputy. He said, I had no idea. It was my number 2. We're going to throw him under the bus. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go into further, a couple of program notes. First of all, for those of you with nothing to do all afternoon, I'm going to be taking over the microphone for John Stadmiller after my own show, continuing many of these same topics. Next Monday, Cindy Sheehan is going to be joining us here on the air, and the following Monday we're going to have Richard Mack back on talking about his convention for the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers of America. Now, we're talking about this situation where Eric Holder is now trying to duck the blame for this sweep of the corporate media phone records by saying it was his deputy's idea. Going to throw him under the bus. Not much loyalty in the upper levels of Washington, D.C. And the good news is, of course, the rats are starting to eat each other. Okay? But beyond that is the question of targeting the press to protect government secrets. That's their entire case. Oh, we had a terrorism investigation. We had to protect the government from leaks, or protect the government from these leakers going to the media here. But you need to understand a basic principle of the United States of America. And remember, nations are not founded on laws. They're founded on principles. And the laws must be subordinate to those principles, or you get tyranny and dictatorship and abuse, which is where we are right now. The reason the Founding Fathers provided for freedom of the press in that First Amendment was to allow the press to serve as a check on government abuse, to give them the freedom to report to the people when the government acted wrongly. It was one of the many ways of keeping that central government subservient to the people. The corporate media often proclaims its traditional role as watchdog on the government, although more recently that's a role taken on by the independent media. So the Department of Justice targeting the corporate media to block leaks is a direct violation of the First Amendment. The press was given that freedom and the responsibility to be able to report on government wrongdoing without fear of retribution or punishment. And for this reason, the corporate media and the independent media are saying this is extreme and dangerous. They weren't pursuing a single line of investigation. They were simply casting a very, very wide net, just looking for something that might be incriminating. And if they were doing it to AP, it's a guarantee they were doing it to other corporate media as well. Now, we're already seeing the propaganda crank up as fast as possible to explain this away. I mean, some of the things they're saying, well, like the conservative group is the Taliban of America. Media Matters actually published a list of talking points for people who want to defend the Department of Justice's spying on Associated Press. And not surprisingly, Media Matters did not allow space on their original article to post comments. Otherwise, I would have pointed out that if there was a legitimate national security investigation, only a few reporters would have been targeted. But when they're just taking all the phone records across the board, that's not an investigation, that's a fishing expedition. Media Matters is trying to say, oh, this is a partisan issue. No, it isn't a partisan issue. Unrestrained federal government snooping on the corporate media and the independent media is snooping on the public at will. It is an affront to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And as that caller said the other day, it is the Bill of Rights, not a Bill of Suggestions. And the corporate media has every right to be absolutely furious about what's going on. Now, getting over to Benghazi, the spin out of the White House is, oh, it's just a sideshow. It's really not important, which try and tell that to the families of all the people who got killed in that. They're trying to trivialize it and let it go away. In fact, probably the White House right now is weighing scandals and saying, okay, they're all bad, but let's see, which is the one we want to hide the most? And, of course, that's Benghazi. They don't want to get back to what that was really all about, in my opinion. if my theory about it is correct. Carney was out there now literally accusing Republicans of fabricating the emails about Benghazi. He actually got up and said, yeah, ignore those emails. The Republicans are just making that stuff up. They're just creating it out of thin air to fit a political narrative. So the mud is starting to fly, and my advice to all of you listening to this show is you better get out that popcorn, because this is going to be a lot of fun to watch as it comes on down here. Over at thedailybeast.com, they had an interesting article, Is Obama worse for press freedom than Nixon? And at this point, I don't think we should be wasting time making comparisons. They were both bad for press freedom. Let's just leave it at that. They're both crooks. Let's just deal with that. They both abuse the power of their office, and debates over which one deserves more tar and feathers are rather pointless. We need to stay focused on the violation of the Constitution and the sheer arrogance of this kind of behavior. I actually met Nixon once when I was very, very, very young, and staying with my grandfather, who was very big in New Hampshire Republican politics, and we lived right across the street from Senator Styles Bridges, who was getting ready to run his own campaign for the White House. And Nixon had just lost to Kennedy, and he used to come over to my grandfather's, and they'd hoist the turkey nip and spend the night complaining about them damn Kennedy boys. And even at 8 years old, I did not like the man. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the situation is, they're in thrash mode. They're in absolute thrash mode. There is no continuous, focused narrative about what's going on coming out of the U.S. government. Rasmussen just put out a poll where they found 57% of respondents want IRS offenders jailed or fired. I noticed they did not have a choice for hanged, drawn, and quartered. But this is a very clever piece of propaganda because they're trying to basically construct the whole issue of the IRS targeting of these political groups as within the IRS itself. And in response to that, all of a sudden, we're getting this statement from Acting Internal Revenue Service Commissioner Stephen Miller saying they have found 2 rogue employees. They're back to the rogue employees. Oh, we're all clean as the preacher's bed sheets here. You know, Obama is clean. We, the management of IRS, is clean. We have found these 2 low-level rogue employees that can't fight back when we offer them up as sacrificial lambs. So that's what they're getting ready to do on that one here. Let's see. Moving on down here. Interesting article out of opednews.com. If the president does it, it isn't illegal. And this is, of course, a reference to a statement that was made by Richard Nixon when he started getting caught for all the skullduggery that he was doing. And Nixon justified it all by saying, I'm the president. If the president does it, it isn't illegal. And, of course, Congress and public opinion had the opposite view, which is why Nixon ultimately had to resign here. And basically what we're looking at in this situation here, like Barack Obama, Richard Nixon was obsessed with leaks. And if you remember, if you're my vintage, you know, they say old people age like fine wine. I'm getting into the vinegar stage myself here. But if you're my age, you remember Nixon created this special covert unit in the White House called the Plumbers, because their job was to stop all the leaks that were going out. And the Plumbers became the Dirty Tricks Squad for CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President. And some of them, E. Howard Hunt, were ultimately arrested at the Watergate conducting the burglary of the Democratic headquarters. So we have all the same elements for a repeat of that political disaster. We have a paranoid president, and he absolutely is. Last Christmas, the Secret Service actually sent somebody out to check on my wife and I, and they showed up, this guy showed up at this little food distribution program that we're in, trying to find out if we were a threat to the president. Which is okay, we made him carry all the heavy stuff. But we have a paranoid president who sees enemies everywhere, just like Nixon did. And now we're seeing a program to silence and intimidate the press, and a cover story that is changing faster and faster and faster as time goes on. I think it's time to dust off that old DVD of All the President's Men. Take another look at that. And on top of Benghazi Gate and IRS Gate and DOJ Gate, there's another one that is surfacing now. Minor, this one's minor, I will grant you, but it indicates this is a systemic problem we are all dealing with. The Environmental Protection Agency has been caught playing favorites with green liberal groups versus the conservative groups. Every time you deal with the EPA, they are supposed to assess fees for when you want information to support whatever report you're doing or whatever project you're working on. And Washington Examiner has found out that the EPA was waiving the fees for more than 90% of the requests from green groups. But they were charging conservatives, and those who question this whole global warming orthodoxy had to pay the full price. And again, this is a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution of the United States of America. So it's an ugly, ugly situation. It's only going to get worse. They're thrashing around trying to find some way to convince the American people that none of this is any kind of a big deal. And you can just smell the panic wafting out from Sodom on the Potomac. And they are really desperate, and desperate people will take desperate chances, and we need to be very, very concerned about that. Now, meanwhile, over in the rest of the world, and we know one of the ways that Obama would love to distract everybody from Benghazi, DOJ, IRS, EPA gate, is to crank up a new war. Israel and the United States are out there with the full court press trying to stop Russia from selling more weapons to the government of Syria. And Netanyahu did visit Putin to try and convince him of that, and it doesn't look like Netanyahu had any more success than John Kerry did, because Putin spent the entire meeting once again warning Netanyahu to keep his hands off of Syria. So Putin is standing firm, and I've got to applaud and salute the man. He is the only world leader in this situation who is still acting like an adult. Obama is acting like a paranoid schizophrenic who's overdosed on his SSRIs. Netanyahu, as always, is acting like a spoiled, belligerent bully. And Putin's trying to keep this thing from getting any worse than it already is. So, now then, over in India, they are now preparing for a two-front war with both Pakistan and China. Now, India and Pakistan have sort of been in a state of war for a very, very long time. They sort of have that border up in the Kashmir, and at 10 o'clock in the morning, India sends shells over into Pakistan, and at 2 in the afternoon, Pakistan sends some shells back, and it's sort of a pro forma thing. Amounts to little more than a fireworks show. They're not even aiming the things. It's just boom, boom, we're at war. But now it looks like they're going to escalate in the region. And India is claiming that China has already had an incursion across their borders and seized territory that does not belong to China. China is saying it's actually their territory that India's sort of been creeping across for a long time, the way that Israel does with Palestine. And now it's heading to a possible outbreak of war in that region. Boy, there are just way too many world leaders who see a war as the way out of the mess they're in here. Up in Afghanistan, they are demanding the arrest of the American leader of one of these death squads that has supposedly disappeared 15 people in the province of Wardak. And Afghanistan is very angry about this, understandably. They're very angry with NATO still being there. They want NATO out of there. So what is the U.S. going to do? Reinvade Afghanistan? Reinvade Iraq? They're getting ready to reinvade Libya. Those gosh darn Libyan people, they aren't staying conquered like they're supposed to. Meanwhile, up in Iraq, which is supposed to be winding down, Kellogg, Brown, and Root, that made just untold billions of dollars shipping really bad food and really horrible water to our troops in the front lines, is now saying it will cost $500 million and take 13 years to close out its Iraq contract. 13 years? The war didn't even last that long. KBR sure got in there in a huge hurry. They've made $38 billion off the American taxpayer, off the Iraq war. And now they're saying, oh, we need another $500 million, and it's going to take us 13 years to sort of pull out of everything we're doing in Iraq. It doesn't take 13 years. Hold a yard sale. sell everything off, get on a plane, come home. It's all about making the money. Now, we were talking last week about one of the military's sexual assault prevention officers being charged with sexual assault. Guy in the Air Force. And apparently now the scandal has hit the Army. Another sexual assault prevention coordinator is facing charges for abusive sexual contact. It's all these officers, they're just for publicity's sake. Oh, yes, we're dealing with the problem of sexual assault in the military. We have these prevention officers. And they're just supposed to stand up there for the press cameras to show that the Army is dealing with the problem. And the reality is, and if you talk especially to young women coming back from the war zone, the problem is very much there. And so now these so-called sexual assault prevention officers are themselves up on charges for sexual assault, proving it's all propaganda and publicity and PR, and they really aren't serious about dealing with this issue here. Now, we're still looking at this issue where Stephen Hawking has ignited the world's awareness regarding Israel's abuses against Palestine, the apartheid state, and the boycott movement. And you would think by now Israel would realize they're raising on a busted flush on this issue. They're hoisting on their own petard, but the attacks are still coming hard and fast. In fact, Desert Peace just put up an article pointing out this horrible cartoon in the Jewish Daily Forward, trying to make fun of this man in a wheelchair for daring to stand up to Israel's right to treat the Palestinians as subhuman creatures. And the more they push this, the more damaging it's going to be in world opinion. Israel is still screaming anti-Semite like the rest of us care about that anymore. And the fact is, they burned out the word. You know, the fact of the matter is, when you are born, when you are a newborn baby and innocent, there is no instinct to be shocked at a word. There's no instinct to be shocked at naked people. All of these things you are supposed to be shocked at are taught. You are taught to be shocked at certain things, certain words, certain ideas, in order to control you. You're taught to be shocked at nudity to keep the clothing manufacturers in profits. You're taught to be shocked at the word anti-Semite. So you stop thinking about the merits of the argument and you go, ooh, blah, 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 ooh, anti-Semite. I have my run and hide. And we have that member of the Knesset who's out there saying, it's just a trick. And that's exactly what it is. It's a trick to control you. And they're screaming anti-Semite at Stephen Hawking. And the problem is they've been screaming anti-Semite at so many people in so many directions, nobody cares any longer. Because when you're taught to be shocked at something, whether it's bad words or naked people, it only works a few times. After you see enough naked people, it stops being shocking. After you hear anti-Semite enough times, it stops being shocking. It loses its effect. And Israel's propagandists don't seem to have realized this. And they are really doing an immense amount of damage to themselves in the eyes of the world with this continued attack on Hawking. Now remember Israel's attack on the Mavi Marmara, the humanitarian aid flotilla that was trying to run the Gaza blockade to take in candy and crayons and medical supplies and all these other horrible things that Israel is absolutely convinced Palestine would use to build a nuclear weapon or something. And Israel attacked this flotilla in international waters. They killed 9 people, one of them an American citizen. This is the same stuff that the U.S. responds to with lethal force off the coast of Somalia. When the Somalian pirates take a ship, the Sixth Fleet goes in there and just guns them all down. But when it's Israel and an unarmed humanitarian fleet, nothing happened. In fact, our government went up to the United Nations and said, it's cool. Israel can kill all the Americans they want. We don't have a problem with that. And surprise, surprise, the International Criminal Court, the Permanent War Crimes Court at The Hague, is opening an investigation into Israel's actions against the Mavi Marmara. Where did this come from? The United States didn't complain. Israel certainly didn't complain. It turns out the complaint comes from the African nation of Comoros, which is a member of that court, even though Israel is not. And because the Mavi Marmara was flagged as a Comoros vessel, they have standing to bring a complaint to the International Criminal Court, and the prosecutor is saying, yes, this is legitimate, we are going to investigate now. So Comoros has balls the U.S. government can only dream of. What the U.S. government was afraid to do because we're going to offend Israel, Comoros just went ahead and did. How wonderful it must be for this little African nation to have a government of courage, a government of principles. Now, there has been a clash in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Apparently, Israel right-wingers burst into the compound. Remember, it's very carefully divided. There's a separate section for Jewish worshippers, separate section for Muslims, and a separate section for Christians to basically keep things peaceful. And these Israelis broke into a section they're not supposed to go into. It's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And apparently Israeli military forces escorted them in. And they caused a ruckus. This is clearly an attempt to provoke a response from Muslims, to give Israel another excuse for another atrocity. This is Israel's game. Poke, poke, poke until you poke back. Ah, you've attacked us. And they're off there with the bombs and weapons here. All right, we're going to talk about the economy a little tiny bit here. Apparently, this is from Huxley Somerville, who's the group managing director over at Fitch Ratings. And he has pointed out a very alarming trend that credit rating agencies, these agencies that have your permanent record of your credit worthiness, they're loosening their standards. They can't get people to borrow money, so they're going to lower the standards to try and get more people into, to start buying houses again, to buy cars, to buy whatever. And this is a repeat of what happened in 2008 when the whole mortgage-backed security fraud was underway. And they started lowering the requirements to be able to finance a home purchase. That's what the subprimes were. And it precipitated this disaster. I don't know that it's going to cause the same thing this time because the American people are much sadder and wiser about these credit games. And the American people just don't have a surplus of capital with which to borrow, even if the ratings standards are loosened. We get all these credit card applications in the mail every single day, and every time I look at one being sent to me, I say, are these people out of their mind? I can't borrow any money. I don't know how I'm going to pay it back. And they pour in. We're getting more credit card applications than any other category of mail right now. We're going to take a break. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. The more you call, the less you have to listen to me. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And apparently the White House has now gone back to their spin that just because the IRS apologized, that in and of itself is no proof that something illegal actually did happen. So they're just hopping around trying to find something that will gain traction with the American people. And like I've said before, I think our government has spent way too much time with public relations firms and advertising agencies, because when you're selling a car or shampoo, you can do trial and error until you find something that works. But when you're talking about national policy, the more the public sees all these different stories come out, the more you lose any sense of a consistent narrative. And they're actually destroying their own credibility by thrashing back and forth like this. All right, we're going to take some phone calls. Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Talking about the IRS here. I believe what you're talking about was on MSNBC, and the show is Thomas Roberts. Yesterday, former NAACP President Emeritus Julian Bond, whose group was audited during the Bush administration, and he believes it was audited unfairly, made the statement that he believed it is entirely legitimate to target Tea Party and other conservative groups, referring to them as being admittedly racist and overtly political. And when Thomas Roberts questioned him on this, asking if he was being a little harsh, he stated he didn't think so because, after all, these groups are the Taliban of American politics.
Yeah, I just caught the tail end of that being quoted on Fox. I heard it on Fox, but so it's apparently getting some traction out there. Ooh, the Taliban. You're all Taliban now.
Well, what I found interesting was I did a little bit of research sitting here while listening to you, and lo and behold, I learned two very interesting things here. In 2011, one Louis Lerner, she is the senior IRS official, granted tax exemption through an expedited process for the Barack H. Obama Foundation, which is a very shady organization which operated illegally for years. But also, at the same time, she also, and it only took 30 days, by the way, for him to get his tax exemption, but at the same time, she also approved an expedited tax exemption, sorry, I have a impediment there, granting a retroactive tax exempt status to one Malik Obama and his organization. And for those who don't know who Malik Obama is, that is Barack Obama's half-brother.
A retroactive tax-exempt status. My goodness. What a wonderful thing that is. All righty, Art, we got to take a break for station identification. Do you have some more? I'll bring you back after these words if you do.
No, I just wanted to bring that to people's attention. Do some research, folks, and have a great day.
All right, thanks. I will do my best. Back with more phone calls after these brief. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And one of the listeners just emailed me this little choice bit of information. Lois Lerner, who's the director of the IRS Exempt Organization Division. She is the person at the center of this whole firestorm about delaying tax-exempt status for Tea Party, Occupy, Patriot, so forth and so on. Apparently, she is going to give the commencement address this Saturday at Western New England University Law School, at which she's going to be awarded the President's Medallion, the highest honor the university can bestow. So remember, when somebody is getting all these little gold, shiny, blingy things to wear around their neck and hang up on the wall, it is just a ruse to convince you you should listen to these people and pay no attention to those wacko tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy kooks who do not have gold plaques all over the walls. It's just a way of frocking somebody with undeserved credibility. Back to the phones here. George in Hawaii. Aloha, brah. What's up?
Hey, Mike, listen, I hope that lady gets a medallion made out of lead. Anyway, listen, real quick story.
I prefer depleted uranium.
Well, she'd have to join the Army for that. Anyway, listen, Mike, real quick story, and true. Last year, one of the major center money banks, I'll give you a name, Citi.
Yes.
They send me one of these teaser things. I've been with them for 19 years, carrying their card, $25,000 credit limit, platinum, the whole deal. I got a zero balance. They send me a teaser, 0 down for 1 year.
I mean 0% for 1 year.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I got the same one.
Yeah, it's a teaser, right?
Yes.
So I jumped into this thing. I borrow 15 G's. I give it to my daughter. She does what she wants with it. I don't care. So I'm paying this thing down, and about the 7th month, my wife makes a payment, and we're $1 short. $1, Michael. It was a clerical error on my wife's part in sending the check over to them.
Mm-hmm.
She calls our local bank. They make a transfer, a dollar transfer within a matter of a couple of hours. Everything's squared up. Citi tells me everything's fine. Within a week, Mike, I get a letter from Citibank saying that my $25,000 premium, whatever the hell it was, is now, pardon my language, is now down to $12,000. And my interest rate has gone from 0 to 29%.
Yeah.
instantaneously.
Yep.
So let me tell you what I did. Went right down to the small claims court, filed a case against Citibank, and within 1 week, they settled with me for $6,000. So I'm going to tell the people that listen to your program, there is justice out there, but it doesn't come free.
No, you have to fight for it. You got to fight for it.
You got to find it, Michael.
Yeah.
You got to search and you got to find it. But if you seek it, it is there. Don't let these money center banks get into your pocketbook, because they'll take you from 0 to 29%. I told the guy at Citi, I said, man, I said, even the mafia doesn't do 29%. And it was just an unbelievable affair. And finally, I paid them off, and they gave me a $6,000 credit, and they walked away smiling because they knew I was going to take them for the whole thing if they weren't careful. But tell your listeners, and I tell you all, do not be afraid of these big money center banks. Take them on. Use the court system. It's there for you. The courts are not your enemies. The courts are your friend. Use them. Go to them. Complain. File a small claims court case. Get some assistance. It's all out there for you. You just got to go get it.
You got to know where it is.
Okay, Mike. Take it easy.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. And we're going to take a break for some commercials here. And when I come back, I have some follow-up comments to that. And it goes back to what we were talking about with Bill Shaw and these other debt, mortgage, credit, repair organizations. It's an awareness the American people need to have, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And by the way, as a note, if you haven't taken a look at the Republic Broadcasting online store, you ought to. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. I have a couple of those products myself, and they're working out very well, especially shortwave radio. And if you really want to get into shortwave listening, you want to make sure you get one that receives what is called single sideband, because then you can listen to the ham operators, and very often they're the first ones out into the world with breaking news and stuff coming from other countries here. Now, getting back to George talking about credit cards and how abusive they can be. You need to understand, the entire banking system does not exist to serve the nation and its people, because it's privately owned. They are there to make money off of you by hook, by crook, any way they can, and there's a lot of crook out there. And as we have talked about many times before when we were talking with Bill Shaw and other people, these financial centers, the banks, mortgage companies, credit card companies, all of them will routinely break the law, and they do it because the vast majority of Americans will simply pay whatever is being demanded out of fear of damaging their credit rating and out of an ignorance of the laws that do exist to protect you, the consumer. Now, as a matter of course, just to share some advice, we're trying to pay our credit cards down, and so we're constantly overpaying them. If you pay just the minimum payment they calculate for you, that's designed to drag out the repayment as long as possible and maximize the interest return. And so it really makes a lot of sense. In the long run, you will save a lot more money if you simply bite the bullet, so to speak, and overpay every month on the credit cards. Plus, you're not going to have that off by one error, which will give the bank an excuse to lower your credit ceiling and go from 0 to 29% interest. And George is absolutely right. The loan shark down there at the pool hall doesn't charge that much interest. It's illegal for the loan sharks to do that, but perfectly legal for the banks. So, yes, you need to be aware of the rules. You need to fight back when you feel you are being abused. You need to basically get out of that whole credit trap. When we pay off our credit cards here, and we're starting to get close, we're going to just tear them all up. It's cash or do without. Because it is a trap. They bait you in with all the latest fashions and the latest gizmos and say, you can have it now, just put it on your credit card. And they're actually making more profit off that credit card than off the product itself. If you go in and buy a car at a car dealership, and they take you into that little office to arrange the financing, and you say, actually, we've got the cash, we just want to pay cash for it, they're going to say, we can't sell it to you at that price. For cash, you get that price only if you're willing to undertake the auto loan. If you're paying cash, there's a premium. That's where the majority of the profit is being made, is on that credit agreement. So you got to fight back, and you got to de-link. The banks exist to enslave you with debt. and you need to break free. And if that means a reduced lifestyle, yeah. It's probably better than every month just all this stress and strain of trying to make the monthly payments. You don't need a brand new car. I'm driving a 12-year-old Honda, and yes, it's showing its age. There's no rust on the paint yet. It's an amazing, amazing car. Honda really does make good cars. I've never had a bad Honda. Had a bad Nissan. Every American car I ever had was an absolute disaster, but those Hondas, they just go and go and go. When I first met my wife, she had a brand new Honda Accord. We had that thing for 17 years without any major headaches. Anyway, getting back to other things here. And speaking about money, apparently Homeland Security has shut down and seized the funds at the main Bitcoin exchange. Basically just shut it down. They don't want anybody having a currency other than those ink and paper notes coming out of the privately owned Federal Reserve that they will loan to you gladly at interest. So they're moving against any other way of conducting commerce. They want you dependent on the private central bank. Just like King George III made the colonies dependent on the Bank of England, which led to the Revolution. I think the reason that the Treasury Department shut down the Liberty Dollar was because George W. Bush had his feelings hurt. They put Ron Paul's face on the coins. Up until they did the Ron Paul dollar, they were leaving the Liberty Dollar alone. They put Ron Paul on there, and all of a sudden they come and shut it down, saying it's counterfeiting. They have the word dollar on the coin. Dollar is not the trademark property of the U.S. government or the Federal Reserve or the Treasury Department. Other countries use the word dollar. Zimbabwe uses the word dollar. I have these coins here, the Maui trade dollar, the Catalina trade dollar. It wasn't counterfeiting. It was just Bush had his feelings hurt. All right, we're going to take another phone call. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike? I written out something about, I think a couple years ago, about credit. And, finally I got through with this couple. They bought their furniture, their flat screen TV, their furniture and everything at Rent-A-Center or these rent-to-own places. They had nice SUVs, and they maxed out their credit cards, wearing the nicest clothes and all that stuff. You know what the thing is about credit when you get into debt and you're in marriage? It will strain the relationship big time.
Yes.
And finally, I got through with them because they were arguing over, they're broke, but, Mike, the thing is, I just told them, here's a few little tips. I told them, send the furniture back to the Rent-A-Center. Mm-hmm. And I say, when you get your cash, I say, go in a Rent-A-Center and get the repos. They'll usually sell them off quicker.
Yeah. We actually have stores here in Hawaii that get the furniture out of the hotels. Every so many years, the hotels will want to replace all their furniture so they look up to date with the latest styles. And it's very durable, well-built stuff because it takes a lot of abuse from all of these tourists who are coming in and out. And you can go down and get some very heavy, well-built furniture. And yes, there are going to be small surface blemishes, but if you want something that's going to last a long time, it's a real good deal. There's police auctions of confiscated cars and all this other stuff that you can do. This idea that you must have on display the latest fashions, the latest gizmos, the latest whatever is part of that trap to get you on that credit hook. And once you start living your life for your own pleasure and not to impress the neighbors, you're going to find yourself with a lot more freedom on your hand. And you're absolutely right. The two leading causes of divorce in America is financial problems and substance abuse. And that's absolutely, and when you talk about people, the horrible epidemic of divorce in this country, and they blame all kinds of other things, like infidelity, and yes, they'll put substance abuse in there. They don't want to talk about the fact that our debt enslavement is itself a major contributor to divorce. In fact, I think it's number one.
Well, the thing is, once they got their credit back in order, they even sent back the SUVs because they were always breaking down.
Oh, it must have been a Nissan.
Yeah, well, and they bought a decent used car. They got no car payments. They got no furniture payments or all this to the Rent-A-Centers and all that stuff. And they found out their marriage is so much better.
Oh, absolutely.
They got actually money to go do things.
Absolutely. Absolutely, that's the way to go. You have to decide what's important in life. You know, and certainly for me, it's my marriage and my wife. And that's the most important thing, and I don't want to have all these other things coming in there. And it is important that you prioritize your life and realize that keeping up with the Joneses is really kind of an unrealistic situation here. And again, that whole credit card situation, it is a trap. It's to and again, they make more money off that credit than off the product itself. When you buy a home, when you total up all the interest you pay on that 30-year mortgage, you will find out the bank actually gets more of your work product through money than the people who actually built the home or owned the land. They get a tiny fraction of that. They get the original purchase price. You wind up paying, depending upon your interest rate, 2 to 3 times as much to the bank for their permission to buy the home. What did the bank put into this deal? Ink and paper or a few keystrokes on a keyboard. That's it. And for that, they get the majority of your work product over that 30-year mortgage.
Well, you know, the owner where I rent the house now, he wants to sell it to me, and he wants to sell it $500 a month. I found it's going to take me 10 years to pay off the house. And he's only asking for 10% of the value for holding the debt. No compound interest.
Well, you know, getting back to the situation about having an older car that is paid for and you're not making payments on it, which is the situation I'm very glad to be in right now after that horrible experience with the Xterra. This is why you're seeing more and more car ads talking about a lease. They don't want you buying the car, because once it's paid off, you're of no more use to the banks. And so now it's a lease. You will lease the car. And you will make payments every month, and when the payments stop, you have to give the car back and get another one and go right back onto that payment treadmill. And it's horribly wasteful of the natural resources used to manufacture the car, but the bankers don't care. It's all about keeping you slaved to death.
Well, my car, I'm getting the engine overhauled and the transmission overhauled, and guess what? It's a lot more cheaper.
Yeah, it is. I got to get a new air conditioning compressor for my Honda now that we're getting into the summer months, but that's going to be, what, $300-400, you know, as opposed to just buying a brand new car. Got to let you go. We're coming up on a commercial break, and we got more callers waiting on the line when we get back, so we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Thank you, George. Talk to you again. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go back to the phones here, apparently David Axelrod has been doing the rounds of the news and TV shows, trying to basically get Obama off the hook for IRS Gate and DOJ Gate and potentially EPA Gate as well. And he's now, the new spin is the government is really too vast for Obama to control, and this is why he doesn't really know what the IRS and Department of Justice are doing. And I don't think David Axelrod understands that what he just told we, the people, is the government is out of control, which is what we have been telling you for many, many years. And because it is the job of the president to keep the government under control, David Axelrod is basically out there saying Obama is innocent because he's incompetent. So they're getting really desperate trying to explain this all away, and again, they're just worried about the next 5 minutes and sounding good, and they're not thinking about how this looks in the long view. There's nobody in Washington maintaining the long view. It's another reason to suspect they're all on SSRIs. All right, back to the phones. Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. This is about credit cards. In November, a friend of mine needed $1,000 within a day or two.
Mm-hmm.
I borrowed it off my credit card at 0% interest, a $40 charge for 6 months.
Yes.
He was going to pay me back in January when he got his income tax. Well, he paid me back in 2 weeks. I went to the bank. I tried to pay the $1,000 and $40 back, and they told me no, it would just go towards your general fund because I owed money on my credit card, and that I had to pay it by August 1st. They would not take it. They would put it towards my general fund. Okay? So, but August 1st, I had to pay that $1,040. Now, I thought that was weird. You know, here I want to pay them back, and they would not take it. No, they'll wait until August 1st, and if I don't make that $1,040 payment, then they'll jack me up like that other man at 19 to 29%. Mm-hmm. But isn't that something?
Yeah, I mean, they have all these arbitrary rules, and the idea is, that they make it so complicated that most people just can't figure it out. It's all jargonized and, self-referential, and the idea is they put all these little traps, these little bear traps or mines out there, and the instant you trip over one of them, they say, aha, we got you. 29% APR, compounded every 5 seconds. And that's really what it's all about.
I've been sitting on the money, and I'll pay them back August 1st, and hopefully maybe it might have a deadline at 3 o'clock instead of 12 in the afternoon. I don't know, but I'm going to be there as soon as the bank opens up,
Well, I wish you a lot of luck, but again, they set these things up purposely for people to stumble and fall, and once you stumble and fall, they say, aha, you're in violation of this agreement, and therefore we can come in and basically loot the heck out of you. But again, we have an economy under the control of private bankers who are running the economy not for the benefit of the nation and its people, but for their own personal gain. And when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, we need to return the public currency to being a public utility. That's how it was set up following the American Revolution. The public currency is a public utility. It is in existence to fuel commerce, not to enrich a private few at the expense of everybody else. And we need to get back to that.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Now, thank you very much for the phone call. A very alert listener just sent me in this wonderful article from 2006. And the article is Federal Source to ABC News, We Know Who You're Calling. So this Department of Justice attack on AP is a continuation of a policy that's been going on for a long time. This was back in 2006 during the Bush administration, where ABC was told by the government, we know who you're calling, we've got your phone records all under surveillance. And again, back then it was done to try and scare the corporate media into not talking to anybody, to try and contain leaks from the government at a time when the Bush administration was still trying to keep the lid on the fact that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And I guess it worked back in 2006 because the corporate media was apparently very reluctant to follow the obvious trains of evidence that we were lied into a war of conquest. I don't know that it's going to work now. The backlash that we're seeing from this AP phone record scandal, we didn't see that in 2006 following this ABC News situation. So I think it's a very, very different environment. Back to the phones. Brian in Georgia. Aloha. Brian, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, just following up with some more about the debt problem and just how well-meaning people get trapped in this debt cycle. Something that some listeners may not know about and probably should on the Fair Credit Reporting Act. If you get your credit report and there is a problem on there, something that you don't recognize, you can put it in dispute. And by putting it in dispute, by notifying all three credit agencies, credit reporting agencies, while they've got that thing, it's showing in dispute, it cannot be used to deny you employment, affect your credit, anything about your credit history, like the amount of your loan or what kind of rates you get. And after you have done that, they've marked it in dispute, or if they don't mark it in dispute...
Okay, we got to let you go. I'm sorry. We got to take another break for commercials. Stay with me, Brian. I'm going to come back to you. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I think we're still talking with Brian in Georgia. And you're absolutely right. You do need to keep an eye on your credit report because they do make mistakes. And I remember many, many, many years ago when I actually had enough money to worry about my credit rating, I got my credit report one time, and they had me down for a bounced check in a city I had never even been to. And they do make these mistakes. And eventually we got this resolved. Somebody had just mistyped one digit on the check bank routing number, or some little thing like that, and it had wound up on my credit report even though I had nothing to do with it. So you need to keep an eye on those issues. Mistakes do get made. Something else you also need to keep an eye on when we're talking about credit cards is when you get your monthly statement, go through all the charges and verify that they belong to you, because we know there's a huge problem with identity theft. And the amateurs, the little kids who will steal credit card numbers, they'll take the credit card and they'll max it out. And that, of course, calls attention to itself. But the way organized crime does this is they'll break into someplace and they'll get 1 million credit card numbers and they'll ding each one for maybe $5 with some benign-sounding service or product or whatever, figuring that the vast majority of people aren't even really examining their credit card statement other than that minimum payment they have to make. And so they reap millions and millions of dollars, and they get away with it for months on end because nobody's really paying attention. So, Brian, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, just to wrap up about when you mark something in dispute with the 3 credit agencies, every month that they ignore that, they don't put it in dispute, and so that it doesn't count against your credit score or harm you in, job search or anything, it's a $1,000 violation. So times 3 credit agencies, that's $3,000. If it goes into 2 months, that's $6,000. You can see how these violations can really pile up in your favor if the credit agencies ignore your dispute letter. And with the tens of millions of records that they have to manage, they generally just tend to ignore, people, and most people just, throw up their hands after a while and go away,
Yeah, and they count on that. These credit rating agencies, the credit cards, all of these companies, they get away with these things because they figure the vast majority of people will just throw up their hands and just pay what's demanded of them and go away. And if an individual stands up and complains, they'll gladly refund the money and correct the account because they're still making money from all the other people who refuse to stand up and protect themselves. And, it's all a numbers game. And the American people, you need to understand, that bank is not your friend. That credit card company is not your friend. They are there to take advantage of you every single way they can. Brian, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Switch over to James in South Carolina. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Got 2 questions. One about the Federal Reserve. I asked Bob Chapman this twice, and he gave the same answer. He said that the interest that the Federal Reserve gets goes to the Treasury. Would you agree with that?
Supposedly the Federal Reserve turns over a portion of the interest to the Treasury, but by no means all, and they're still making money hand over fist. And remember, the interest on the national debt is only a small part of the operation because the Federal Reserve is also issuing all of the currency to the lesser banks to loan you for private financing, to buy that new TV set, to buy the furniture, and that interest is not shared with the Treasury. This is why the Federal Reserve is refusing audits.
Does that interest then go back to the Federal Reserve? I mean, I guess nobody knows if it's not audited, but...
Yeah, well, see, what it is, the Federal Reserve, because they are the sole issuer of the currency in the country, when smaller banks and credit card companies loan you money, they turn around to the Federal Reserve to get it from them, and they basically split the interest between them. The issuing bank and credit card company gets a part of that 29% interest you're paying, and the rest goes back with the principal to the Federal Reserve. And they keep all of that. That part of it is not shared with the U.S. Treasury.
Okay, got a question about Smedley Butler. You want that one?
Yeah.
Okay. I was always interested in him, and you said something that the other week that I'd never heard before. When they brought all that stuff out of the Dickstein Committee, nothing was ever done about it. And you said, if I understood you right, that the people were too powerfully placed to have anything done about him, and they threatened Roosevelt.
Yes.
I've never read that before. I'd be interested in reading it. I've read a couple of books about it, but where does this information come from?
I'm going to have to go back and look at my sources that I used for the article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, but basically, in a nutshell, it came down to all of these bankers who tried to organize this coup d'etat against Roosevelt and recruited Smedley Butler to lead the military portion of it. They basically told Roosevelt, you can't arrest us. If you arrest any one of us, the rest of us will crash the economy, and that will be the end of the New Deal. And Roosevelt was not able to go after any of these people until the outbreak of World War II, at which point he prosecuted most of them under the Trading with the Enemies Act. And believe it or not, this story is the factual real foundation for the novel and the movie 7 Days in May. Although in the script in Hollywood, the part involving the Wall Street bankers was taken out, and they made it look like it was a purely military attempt at a coup d'etat, which was not the truth. But Smedley Butler is an American hero, and it's a shame he does not get more accord in the history books.
Do you think that's why they don't talk about him as much?
Oh, obviously. It's like when the Federal Reserve Act was passed, all of the public schools in America stopped teaching about the Currency Act as the cause of the revolution. When I went to grade school, it was always, T-Tax and Stamp Act, and they never mentioned the Currency Act. Because the smart kids in the room would stand up and say, wait a minute, we're back in that same scam again.
Well, that's all, Michael. Enjoy your show. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch over to JP in California. Aloha, JP. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, JP here, first-time caller.
Yes.
I just discovered a situation. I am responsible to run a small company.
Yes.
That manufactures just in time. 95% of our sales are made through credit card processing.
Yes.
Just made a sale about a month ago. And suddenly I noticed that they reversed the sale and took the money away from my account. 23 days later, it was deposited.
Mm-hmm.
No phone calls, no emails, nothing can be done. I'm just puzzled because I don't know how to work anymore. I mean, there is no way. I mean, they pushed the credit card on us, correct? I mean, it was highly favorized by the banks, and now it's not even 100% secure for us.
Okay.
It is.
Now, we're getting into an area where I am definitely not an expert, and I'm not familiar with how banks handle credit card processing for businesses, because I've never been in a business where we took credit cards.
Well, I didn't expect you to. The only thing is that I bring that to the table because, I mean, it's another way where the banks are screwing everybody up.
Oh, yeah. No question about that. That's what they do. Again, when you have the nation's economy under the control of private bankers, it is not being run for the nation or its people. It's being run for the benefit of those private bankers. And when we talk about a new country, after this whole mess is finished thrashing around and dying, we need to return the public currency to being a public utility. Because that's what this nation started with. That's what made this nation great. And it got high.
The thing is that, I mean, when we process a credit card, we receive an approval. I mean, it's either declined or approved, correct?
Yes, correct.
The meanings of the word approval should be giving us 100% security in our money.
They should, but the question is, did the customer reverse it? Did the customer come back and say, I dispute this purchase?
No.
Okay.
No, the bank. The bank.
Did they give you...
I got basically hit by a guy that used a stolen card.
Okay.
But they approved the transaction. Right?
Yeah, see, here's the thing. My understanding was, at least up until recently, was part of this whole contract of paying fees to the credit card companies and credit card processing was they were going to cover the fraud. Now they're dumping the fraud on you, the business whose product or service was being sold. I really think you need to talk to a lawyer about this one.
Really?
Yeah. I'm not in a position to have any kind of information that would be meaningful for your situation, but it does look to me, and as you say, the banks are in business for their own gain, and they're cheating the customers, they're cheating the providers and the vendors. This idea that upon detection of fraud, they simply reverse that payment out of your account without even giving you a warning. I think that's, whether or not it's legal, it is certainly unethical to not give you an opportunity to cover that loss ahead of time. And I imagine it probably, it may have triggered off some overdrafts, and of course, overdraft fees are another big money maker from the banks. And the banks have gone back to a practice of processing debits against your account before the credits, every night to try and maximize the number of overdrafts and fees they can charge. It's completely out of control. It absolutely is.
Well, I just wanted to bring that up to you.
All right. Well, that's good to know.
I listen every day, Michael.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope you sort this mess out. I'm not even sure what they did to you is legal. It's certainly unethical, but again, this is an area I'm not an expert in, and I think you need to maybe talk to a lawyer. You may have grounds for a lawsuit.
The thing that I want to bring out is that it was a fairly large amount.
Yes.
But what if that happened on a daily basis for small amounts like restaurant bills or very small amounts under $50 being reversed away from the merchant without them really noticing it until 30 days later when they do their accounting, I mean, it's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, it is. This lack of a notification, again, and I know you don't want to spend however much an hour lawyers charge these days, but I think it's worth a phone call to an attorney to see if this is actionable. It may be. I don't know. This is an area I don't know. I'm going to have to say you need somebody with an expert view on that. So thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to switch over to Anthony in California. Aloha, Anthony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes. Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on. I'd like to talk about two things.
Yes.
First, you mentioned that the country needs to be turned back or brought back to, the central banks need to be brought back to a public utilities.
Yes.
For the country.
Yes.
Is there a movement, a national movement towards that?
Not national, but there is a public banking movement in several states now. And, of course, it is opposed quite harshly by the Federal Reserve, and even the public banks, though, are going to be required to go to the private Federal Reserve for their initial source funding. But ultimately what we need, the Federal Reserve is never going to loose their leech-like grab on the throats of America. We're basically going to have to say, after this whole system comes crashing down and we're starting up a new country, we simply say no private central banks. We're going to have the government create the currency, spend it into circulation for what the government needs. It will flow through commerce without accruing interest and then be taxed back at the same amount to balance the books and close the cycle. That is how the U.S. government started, and it made the standard of living very high for Americans because their work product, there wasn't a piece being just shaved off every single day to give to the private bankers. But these private central banks are predatory. They're the common enemy of all humanity. They collude with each other to hold the world in debt slavery. And if you read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, they are the authors of many of these wars. And it comes down to forcing private central banks onto countries that don't want it. Libya is a good example. 2.5, 3 years ago, Muammar Gaddafi was everybody's new friend. He was no longer a terrorist. He had acknowledged Israel's right to exist. He was building these amazing civic works projects in Libya to green it up. Libya was a happening place. Their standard of living was really climbing. And then all of a sudden, Gaddafi says, we're going to have a state central bank and a value-based currency, the gold dinar, and if you want to buy Libya's oil, you must pay for it with gold dinars. Boom! Next thing you know, they invade Libya. They kill Gaddafi. The gold for the gold dinar, nobody even knows where that went. And they, even before the fighting was over, a brand new privately owned central bank was in place in Libya, issuing the Libyan public currency as a loan at interest, which is why the Libyan people are even now basically back there trying to kick the United States out. And the U.S. already has a Marine expeditionary force approaching Libya to reconquer the place and say, you will be a slave to the private banks.
Mike?
Yeah.
I want to tell you that I tried to suggest to your boss, John Stadtmiller.
Yes.
About a conglomerate of states, forming a nationalized bank.
Yes.
And whereby people would pass out petitions, making the states form a nationalized bank, so that it would be codified into law, and that the governors and the state legislatures would be forced to go along with it.
Well, unfortunately, the legislatures, I have to cut you off because we're almost at the commercial break here. The legislatures can basically go along that line. I mean, the Arizona legislature passed a bill saying gold and silver are now acceptable legal tender. Jan Brewer vetoed it, because I think she's planning on a career change to Washington, D.C., and you don't get a job in D.C. Without making friends with the Federal Reserve. And you can have all these different banking models, but it all comes down to who has the authority to issue the money and under what circumstances. Now, under the Constitution, money creation authority was vested in the U.S. government. In theory, it should not have been transferable without a constitutional amendment. So you can form all these little state banks you want, but as long as they are still dependent on the Federal Reserve to obtain the currency in the first place, we're still in that same system of slavery. And
no, but if these conglomerate of states get together, at least half the states of this country get together and codify this into law.
Yeah, but it's
nationalize the bank and write off the debt.
All the federal,
just like.
Let me get a point here because we're almost out of time. In fact, I'm going to have to let you go because we're coming up on a commercial break here. All the federal government has to do is say that all taxes and fees are payable only in Federal Reserve notes, and it doesn't matter what the states do. Everybody still has to go back to the Federal Reserve to get the correct currency to pay their taxes and fees to the government. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And you need to remember what Mayor Rothschild said. Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes the laws. So you can talk about all these state public banks and all these other possible banking networks, but as long as everybody is constrained to get their currency from a private central bank that issues that currency as a loan at interest, the debt will still grow faster than the available money with which to pay that debt. It's a pyramid scheme. And it only perpetuates as long as you find more and more new borrowers to allow the creation of new money, part of which is then siphoned off to pay the interest on the old money. But all pyramids collapse. And because of globalization, we are in a very unique space in history where all of these private central banks, ECB, IMF, World Bank, Federal Reserve, all of these banks are hovering on the edge of collapse all at the same time. And that's a wonderful opportunity because if they all come crashing down, the entire world will be free to say, we need to go back to the public currency as a public utility. Because up until now, any time one nation shut down its private bank or that private bank simply collapsed, the other nations with private central banks would immediately come in and start the scam again. That's why when Congress refused to renew the charter for the first bank of the United States of America, they were literally threatened with a war, which resulted in the War of 1812. So, anyway. Now, getting back to more recent issues. We've all been talking about Obamacare, and earlier in the show I was commenting on this egregious release by the IRS of confidential documents that were supposed to be kept private regarding these various conservative groups whose applications for tax-exempt status were basically being delayed and interfered with, and how the IRS released some of this confidential information to a liberal journalism organization, which did the right thing and went public and said, look, the IRS is not supposed to hand this stuff out. And I posed the question, why are we supposed to trust the IRS with our private medical records if they're being this reckless with people's confidential tax information? And the answer, of course, is we shouldn't. The IRS doesn't know anything about health care. Why are they getting the goodies? Because it's all about taxes and money. It's all about taking more money away from you. Now, Obama sold his whole Obamacare policy to the American people, promising this would make health care affordable to all. But apparently, cost estimates from 17 of the nation's largest insurance companies are suggesting that the health insurance premiums under Obamacare will grow an average of 100%. Some will go up 400%. That's a doubling or a quintupling. And remember, we saw this back when auto insurance was made mandatory. Prior to that, auto insurance companies had to be attractive to the consumer because it was optional. And they would have low rates and good service. And once it became mandatory, the rates went through the roof, and the service just evaporated, and we're seeing exactly the same thing with Obamacare. Got to take a break for station identification. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And, of course, everybody's out there grandstanding with all these new gates, and everybody's using it to promote their own agenda or to promote themselves. And apparently Senator Jim Inhofe is going to introduce a bill to basically criminalize the IRS targeting an individual or group based on their beliefs. And he says, we need a new law. No, you need to enforce the laws that are already there. Politicians, I'm doing my job, I've got to create another law here. Well, what the IRS did is already illegal. It's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution of the United States of America. I wonder if Jim Inhofe has actually read that. And we see this time and time again. A good example, Bernie made off with the loot, ran a little Ponzi scheme, looted his own investors for $65 billion, and Congress stands up and says, we need a law to... There were already laws that were not being enforced. And every time Congress fails to do its duty, rather than man up and say, yeah, we had a law, we weren't applying it, the Department of Justice didn't do their job, SEC didn't do their job, Minerals Management Service didn't do their job, they get up there and say, well, we need a new law. We have way too many laws already. All of them full of loopholes and dodges that favor the political cronies here. Now, speaking about abuses of the money junkies against the people, interesting little story. This came out of Daily Mail, where United States Airlines, interesting we had to go to Britain to get this news, by the way, U.S. Airlines collected more than $6 billion last year by charging for carry-ons, for the sodas you are served in flight, premiums for more favorable seats, $6 billion in added revenue. By the way, there is a reason why these airlines have sodas and drinks. And I don't mean the alcohol ones, but water, fruit juice, whatever they have. When you're at that high altitude in the cabin, yes, the airplane is at 30,000 feet, the cabin altitude is somewhere around 8,000 feet. You dehydrate. And you need that fluid to replace the dehydration. But now they're starting to charge for that. $6 billion in extra fees. And it's just, it's all administered rather crazily. And I want to share this quick story with you. Last year, when I took my lady love to the World Choir Games in Cincinnati, our checked bag weighed 51 pounds, 1 pound over the limit, for which the airline wanted to charge me an extra $90 for that 1 pound. So we solved the problem by opening up the checked bag, and I took out this large monopod for my camera, and I stuck that in my carry-on camera bag. And we were under the 50 pounds, and we got on the airplane. Still the same weight. All I did was move from the checked bag to the carry-on bag, and of course TSA gave me a hassle over this large metal pipe that looks like it could potentially be a weapon. Flying used to be fun. I can't stand to travel anymore. Between TSA and all of this other, money junkie, I need a nickel and dime you to death. It's just really, really insane here. All righty, let's see. So we talked about Jim Inhofe here. Apparently the House is getting ready to approve a cut in the food stamp program. Remember, we even talked about the fact the U.S. government is advertising to people to come on to food stamps. Now they're going to talk about cutting how much each individual family gets in food stamps, and it's already not enough. Claire and I are involved in this program here at a local school where the kids who are on food stamps, we have to put together food bags for them because the food stamps are already running out in week 3 of every single month. They're going hungry in that 4th week. And they're going to cut it back even more. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And just following up on that story we were covering before the break on how the House of Representatives is starting to consider a bill to cut back on food stamp assistance. Now, the Founding Fathers viewed it as the proper role of government to do for the community and the nation that which the community and nation needed but could not accomplish on an individual basis. And originally, under the Constitution, the federal government was allowed to collect taxes with the understanding that the money was to be then returned back to the taxpayers in the form of services and programs. Not siphoned off to give to Wall Street, not siphoned off to give to Israel, not siphoned off to make cronies intensely rich inside the military-industrial complex and the security-industrial complex. And we are in a situation right now where even as the government is trying to find new ways to tax you, they are working to spend less and less on you, the taxpayer. Maintenance of infrastructure has been deferred, is the polite word for it. And even as this government advertises to get more people on food stamps to make you dependent on the government for your next meal, now they're cutting back on that. And this is an insane amount of hardship because those families who are dependent on food stamps right now, the food stamp money is not keeping up with food inflation. It's not making it all the way through the month. And they want to cut it back even further. I think Congress ought to be talking about cutting back their salaries and their perks. They'll never do it, but other than a token amount, yes, we're giving up 5 cents an hour in our salary here to prove that we're men of the people, men and women of the people here. All righty, let's see. Dan the Man is in our control room with us for the next 2 hours and 50 minutes because I'm going to be going on to John's show after this show here. Now, getting back to the economy, there's been a lot of focus on the so-called BRICS nations who have started to evolve beyond their original mutual cooperation into forming their own central bank. And they're basically preparing to challenge the dollar and private central banking, which is, of course, why the Federal Reserve is telling the U.S. government, you got to blow up Russia, you got to blow up China, you got to blow up all those other countries who dare to operate their economy without private central banks. It's a continuation of all wars are bankers' wars. These private central bankers historically have been willing to send hundreds of millions of human beings to horrible death and disfigurement to keep the world enslaved to their little scheme. They'll assassinate people to protect their banking system. They'll start wars, bribes. These are people without any moral compass whatsoever. So we're starting to see all this bad-mouthing of Russia and all these BRICS nations. They're a threat to the national security. No, they're a threat to private central banking. And we ought not to confuse the wealth and privilege of private central bankers with the security of the nation as a whole. It's the security of the 1%ers. But I don't think we ought to be sending our children out to die to maintain the lifestyles of the rich and undeserving. Do you? Now, interesting little story coming out of the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is apparently one of a continuing series of lawsuits between the SEC and a gentleman named Charles Kokesh. Apparently he's been in ongoing trouble with the federal government, Securities Exchange Commission, for the last few years. And this is Adam Kokesh's father. And that's kind of a very weird confluence here, where Adam Kokesh, of course, as you know, is the radio host who is trying to organize an armed, loaded march into Washington, D.C. on July 4th. And I think this is an incredibly bad idea. It is tailor-made to be turned into an incident that would allow Obama to declare a national emergency, repeal the Second Amendment, confiscate all the guns, which we know is what he wants, and especially as these gates are starting to fluff up around him, and we already know he's paranoid. This growing awareness of his political exposure is only going to motivate him all that much more to try and start a war or provoke a confrontation between the federal government and the people, a violent one, because that is what the federal government is prepared to deal with. The federal government cannot deal with an informed and educated American people simply standing up and saying, we will not be the wallet of last resort for Wall Street any longer. Because foreign investors are already listening to that message Foreign investment in the U.S. is in serious, serious decline. Now, we already know that the chief of the District of Columbia Police, Kathy Lanier, has already said her department will meet and confront the Adam Kokesh march at the city line. They're already saying there will be a confrontation. I'm very surprised that Alex Jones, who had originally come out and said this is a dumb idea for pretty much the same reasons I am saying it, has now reversed course and plans to be there in Washington, D.C. as part of this march. And regardless of whether Adam Kokesh himself is on the level, or if maybe he's been offered a little deal that if he'll help set up this whole manufactured false flag crisis, they'll let his father off the hook for the lawsuits. The U.S. government is no doubt planning on how they can use this march to spark an event that will demonize gun owners and allow Obama to basically ramrod some kind of a blockage or ban on the Second Amendment. Now, the only way to repeal the Second Amendment is with another amendment. Whether they would be able to get 3/4 of the states to ratify is very much up in the air, but on the other hand, they might lie about it like they did with the 16th Amendment. But with Benghazi Gate, IRS Gate, DOJ Gate, EPA Gate engulfing the White House, Obama's in a panic to find a distraction to save himself. Now, if I could get to D.C. myself, I would want to organize a counter-march of unarmed gun owners and Constitution supporters to send the message to the public that Kokesh and his group do not represent the majority of the American people. They're a fringe group that thinks carrying armed guns into Washington, D.C. is a cool idea. But the rest of us out here need to start sending out to the public, to your friends, family, your social media, we do not support this. We do not support an armed confrontation with Washington, D.C. because it is so much what Washington, D.C. wants to see happen right now. Now, there's another alarming development. This is coming out of the aftermath of the Boston false flag bombing, where the Pentagon has arbitrarily declared that it now has authority over civil disturbances. They're basically saying that even in the absence of a request from the president or the governor of a state, the Pentagon now has the authority, according to themselves and in direct violation of posse comitatus, to intrude into anywhere where there's a civil disturbance going on. In other words, this is a reinforcement of the idea. The federal government is preparing to declare war on the 50 states. That means you. And I am very, very concerned. I am convinced Adam Kokesh and his armed march into Washington, D.C. is the engraved invitation for the federal government to suspend the Constitution, declare a national emergency, martial law, and start confiscating guns from everybody. And once they have the guns, they're going to be coming for your gold and silver. And then for your children, for more wars of conquest. Now, talking about money junkies at all levels of society, and we were talking yesterday about how Detroit is just completely out of money. In another few weeks, they're going to be absolutely broke. There was that one school district just literally had to shut down, fire all the teachers, and close the school because they're out of money. We're too busy showering money all over the weapons makers, all over Israel and all over Wall Street. There's nothing left to take care of you pesky Americans. Down in Florida, apparently they have embarked on a program where they're shortening the time on the yellow traffic light. You know, you're driving down the street, you see the light is green, and as you approach the intersection, it goes to yellow, and you figure, I've got enough time to go through before it turns to red. Well, apparently they have drastically shortened the amount of time the yellow light is visible in order to catch more people on their red light cameras and impose more traffic tickets. They're generating millions in additional revenue. This has nothing to do with traffic safety. This is pillaging the population. This is exactly what it is, pillaging that population. And apparently, they are violating the federal recommendation for the minimum amount of time a yellow light must be on display. Because if you're in the intersection when the yellow light is still on, legally you have a right to clear the intersection. But if that yellow light just flashes right on through into red, more and more people are getting caught. And that's what it's all about, maximizing opportunities for tickets. Alrighty, we're coming up here on another commercial break, and join us on the air, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about how the police are out of control and the justice system is completely screwed up, and I really do think that Eric Holder ought to be more concerned with the problems within the justice system than who is talking with whom over at Associated Press or apparently from 2006 ABC News. This is a story we're getting from the Trenches World Report. Apparently down in Colorado there's been a huge scandal because apparently whatever system they're using to keep track of all of their prisoners somehow got messed up, and the wrong sentence lengths were assigned to the wrong prisoners. And apparently a lot of guys who were put out on parole are going to have to be arrested and brought back to prison. Other prisoners have been kept way too long, way beyond the original court-imposed sentence. So they're not being very careful with that stuff at all here. Now then. Interesting little story, and this came out of Intellihub.com, where this gentleman's business is buying and selling knives, collector knives, things like that at local flea markets. He's got a little booth. And apparently the police arbitrarily showed up, declared some of the knives that he had in violation of the law, confiscated thousands of dollars worth of product. When he complained and tried to point out the letter of the law, he had all the proper import papers, customs duty, he's running it as a business, he's following all the rules, dotting every I and crossing every T. And when he tried to go back to the police and said, I need my inventory returned to me, it is all legal to own, the police arrested him. And it is a reminder, the police don't always follow the letter of the law. In many cases, they do not know the letter of the law. It's one of the side effects of legislatures that just pass more laws because that's what they're paid to do and they want to look good. You can be carrying a legal weapon, but the police will still confiscate it and arrest you if they imagine it to be dangerous. Now, here in Hawaii, we have some of the strictest gun laws in the nation, but the laws regarding knives are pretty much loose. The only thing you're prohibited from having are obviously button-operated switchblades, balisongs, and dirks. Those are prohibited. You are not allowed to carry those in public. Hawaii is one of the few states where you can legally carry a sword cane. But I had a friend of mine over at the Hawaii Police Department who says the police are going to confiscate these items anyway, and they very often just keep them for themselves. And if you try and complain, you will be arrested for resisting whatever. And I point this out, first of all, to show you how precarious a situation this armed march into Washington, D.C. is going to be. And also to point out very simply, in that Second Amendment, it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Doesn't say firearms, it says all arms. So swords and knives right alongside guns may not be infringed. We're going to go to the phones here. Marty in Florida. Aloha, Marty. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Doing okay.
Been listening to you for a while. I started listening to you on Charlie McGrath when you was on there.
Okay.
And must agree with most of your points.
Well, if you agreed with all of them, I'd suggest you seek psychiatric help immediately.
I do have one issue with Adam Kokesh. I think you're way off base here, man. I think you should read Patrick Henry's speech on the Revolution, and that would explain most of what he intends to do. we have a right to bear arms. We have a right to go and petition. I think he's 100% right on this. And
I will agree with you that in principle he is correct. My concern is how the federal government, which has already completely abandoned even the pretext of complying with the Constitution, is going to use this to create some kind of an event that will allow them to push their agenda of disarmament forward. Now, when Patrick Henry made his speech, he was dealing with the context of an entire nation that was on the verge of rising up against this foreign-imposed government from Great Britain. And for a revolution to succeed, what you want is for it to erupt across as broad a front as possible. My concern about Adam Kokesh is he's presenting a single point for which the federal government to come down on and crush and make a point out of. And, if there were to be a revolution in this country, and I would really like to avoid that, the very last city we march into is Washington, D.C. Remember when Castro kicked out the Batista government? He did not march into Havana, Cuba until the war was already over. And Adam himself may be right on the level here. He may see this as just a publicity stunt to get his name in the media, and it certainly worked at doing that. But I'm telling you right now, the government itself is looking at this as an opportunity to put agent provocateurs into that crowd so that they will either shoot at the D.C. police, shoot at the White House, shoot at the Congress, and then Obama will have his public relations coup to demonize all gun owners. This is a repeat of the staged riot at Disneyland that was used to discredit and destroy the anti-war movement back during the Nixon years. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And yet more damning information about the Infernal Revenue Service. Apparently, the IRS is now facing a class action lawsuit over allegations that it improperly accessed and stole health records of some 10 million Americans, including the medical records of all California state judges. Why does the IRS even need this information? Presumably under Obamacare, there should be a process where the IRS gets the information it is legally entitled to have. But apparently they were out there grabbing this stuff willy-nilly, and now they're looking at a class action lawsuit. And we're told we're supposed to trust the IRS with our medical records. They'll keep them safe. They'll keep them private. Absolutely insane here. Now then, getting over to Mali. Remember Mali, little nation in Africa, Africa's third largest gold producer. And going back to where Germany requested the return of their gold bullion on deposit at the Bank of France and the New York Federal Reserve, and they got the stall. The Bank of France told Germany it would take 5 years to return their gold bullion. Federal Reserve said something like 7 to 8 years. Really? We deposited it with you. Don't you have it? Apparently not. And then 1 week later, 1 week after that, France decides they have to invade Mali, which, as I said before, is Africa's third largest gold producer. And they were going in there for humanitarian reasons. These poor people are being oppressed by the evil. You've all heard the same stuff all over again. They were going to be in and out, and it was all humanitarian. Now France has announced they are staying in Mali. Mali will be under indefinite occupation by France and the U.S., The United Nations Security Council has approved a resolution saying, yes, we have to stay in Mali, at least until the gold runs out. The United Nations is rapidly destroying its own credibility. They also just passed a resolution condemning Syria's President Assad and apparently recognizing one of these opposition groups, the one favored by the U.S., as the legitimate transitional government. So it looks like we're going back into Syria again. And the United Nations has really become a joke. Of course, they were a joke for their unwillingness to stand up to their own member, Israel. Israel was admitted to the United Nations with 2 conditions on its membership. The first condition was that the Palestinians had a right to return to the homes and villages they were kicked out of during the creation of Israel. The second condition was that if the Palestinians themselves chose not to return, Israel had to financially compensate them for their lost property. Israel has not complied with either one of those conditions of its membership. Israel holds the world's record for defiance of United Nations resolutions. If the United Nations wanted to regain its credibility in the world, they would kick Israel out, because Israel has not kept any of their promises. Israel refuses to do what the United Nations tells it. The United Nations, along with the United States, have repeatedly asked Israel to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and submit to IAEA inspections. Israel continues to refuse. And by the way, that makes every single penny of your tax money sent to Israel by the United States government a crime under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act. Because both of those pieces of legislation forbid the U.S. government from sending aid to any nation in possession of nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons technology that has not signed the NNPT or allow IAEA inspections. So the U.S. government is breaking its own laws, sending your money to Israel. 4 times the entire cost of the Apollo moon program so far. And no giant leap for mankind out of all that money. Now, interesting little story coming out of the Daily Sheeple, and admittedly, this is way too late to do anything about it. I don't want to make this a big deal here. You know, there's, as the courts like to say, no remedy is possible. But apparently, St. Joseph County, this is up there in, I've actually managed to mislay which state we're talking about. This is out of Daily Sheeple. But basically, a county Democratic Party chairman named Butch Morgan Jr. has been found guilty in a jury trial of felony conspiracy to commit petition fraud and forgery. And former County Board of Elections worker Dustin Blythe was found guilty of felony forgery counts and falsely making a petition. They apparently were just making up petitions to get Obama on the ballot for the primary. It's election complete. They just made up the names and addresses on the petitions, and they got caught on it here. Now, getting over here to Sandy Hook, we have been talking for a very, very long time about how these various entities, these various crimes, these mass shootings and so forth and so on, were linked to SSRI, antidepressants. And people who are either on or withdrawing from these antidepressants can experience episodes of extreme behavior, including suicide, mass violence. And, of course, the pharmaceutical companies are very, very worried that this is becoming public knowledge. And, of course, the gun grabbers don't want anything else to take away from the idea that guns are bad. We have to take the guns away. And so it was rather weird to see this story coming out in the Daily Mail in Great Britain that toxicology tests show Sandy Hook gunman Adam Lanza had no drugs or alcohol in his system when he carried out the massacre. And they basically said within the body what they were testing for were illegal drugs or antidepressants. Now, Adam Lanza was reported to be taking Fanapt, which is not an antidepressant, but an antipsychotic. It is not an SSRI, but the manufacturer of Fanapt warns in the little paper that comes with the bottle of medication, it can trigger episodes of extreme rage and paranoia. Unless it is specifically being looked for, Fanapt will not show up on a screening for SSRIs because it's not an SSRI. Not surprisingly, this article was not allowing comments on the story. And remember, these SSRI-linked episodes of violence were people who were either on the medications or withdrawing from them. And if you are withdrawing from SSRIs, then no, they're not going to show up in your body. This is clearly a pander to the pharmaceutical industry and the gun grabbers to try and say, oh, no, there's no other reason for these mass violence. It has nothing to do with these wonderful products sold to you by these pharmaceutical companies. They were looking for the wrong medication. Adam Lanza was never reported to be on SSRIs. He was on Fanapt. So they looked for alcohol, illegal drugs, and SSRI antidepressants. They were looking for the things they knew they would not find. Meanwhile, over in Great Britain, snow and winds of 65 miles per hour hit Devon and Cornwall. And the media, which is still trying to push this whole global warming thing, described this as fairly unusual weather for May. Yeah, I think so. When you have snow falling on Britain in May, just weeks from summer, that's an eye-opener. When you have giant blocks of ice crushing homes in Minnesota in mid-May, it's Mother Nature sending you a signal that all this nonsense about human-caused global warming is just nonsense. Now, one of the articles of faith of the Carbonazis is the Arctic ice is melting, the sea levels are rising, the polar bears are drowning, blah, 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 blah. Right now, the Arctic has the most mid-May ice that it has had in a decade. Looking at May to May to May to May, the ice is increasing. United States spring temperatures have been in a decline for almost 30 years. Now, back in 1983, the EPA was predicting 6 feet of sea level rise by 2100. And careful measurements taken along the coast of California are showing sea levels are actually just slightly lower, which makes sense if, in fact, the Arctic is grabbing more ice. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. Susan in Michigan. Aloha. Susan, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. You were just talking about Lanza and Fanapt, and I don't think that's accurate, and I'll tell you why. I got really deep into the whole Sandy Hook hoax thing when it went down and kind of made it my mission to run down every story, every claim that was being made. Mm-hmm. And on Fanapt, I tried to find the source because it was reported. Mm-hmm. All of these BS stories were an anonymous source says.
No, Adam this was Lanza. His uncle. This was his uncle who said that.
Okay. All right. I think you're right. But I'll tell you what, I ran that down to the New York Daily News, and it was repeated again in some Boston rag. And then one of those papers retracted the story, saying it turned out, nobody really did say that about Fanapt. And
well, let me ask you a question here real quick. If somebody was just going to make up a story that Adam Lanza was on medication, why would they pick Fanapt? It's not well known. In fact, I'd never heard of it before this story came out. If somebody was going to come out and just make up that he was on some kind of a drug, they'd pick one that they probably heard in the corporate media, like he was on Zoloft or the rest of these. The fact that it was Fanapt, which is such an uncommon drug, I think tells me that the initial report was correct, and the retraction, like this tox study story that we just saw, was intended to protect the pharmaceutical industries and to protect the gun grabber agenda. Because you need to remember, before all these shootings happened, we had Fox News was admitting there was a link between these prescription medications and violence. Michael Moore is on video admitting that these are a problem. We have seen all these documentaries saying this is a problem with all these medications. But as soon as the gun-grabbing agenda went into effect, everybody stopped talking about this link between SSRIs and violence, and yet it is so well documented. If you go over to SSRIstories.com, it's just list after list after list of people who are on these medications, and then just out of a clear blue sky, they stab somebody, they shoot somebody, they run them over with a car, they club them with a sledgehammer, they harm themselves. And I think one of the most revealing stories they have there is this kid who tried to commit suicide. They did get to him in time, and he survived, and after it was all over, and they said, "Why'd you try and kill yourself?" And he says, "I don't know. It just popped into my head, and I couldn't stop myself." They're messing with the brain with these chemicals. And it's,
well, Mike, I'm not arguing the impact of drugs on our brain chemistry and how negative it can be. But I think that's a story that you should run down yourself, because I'll tell you what, I spent a couple hundred hours online nonstop following this whole Sandy Hook hoax thing, I don't even think that Adam Lanza was there. That's my opinion. You're familiar with the guy that has the Memory Hole blog, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of more in that camp. I don't think any kids were killed there, and I think
well,
there's
I have
plenty of
I have to
evidence for
disagree
that.
with you on that one. I have to disagree with that. Yes, a lot of people did die at Sandy Hook here. We do know that they were lying about the assault rifle that they claimed he took into the school. And we know because of the security system at the school, he couldn't have walked in there with a long gun. We know it was found in the trunk of the car. They were reshaping this to maximize its effect for the gun-grabbing agenda, which at that time was focused on assault weapons. And once they finish demonizing those, they're going to come after the handguns. So we know they were lying about it, but I don't want to get caught up in arguing over the fine details. What my focus is, what did they use it for? And they used it to push the agenda of demonizing guns and gun owners and ignoring this link to SSRIs. And again, because of that demonstrable agenda at work, this is why this Adam Kokesh stunt on the 4th of July to march into Washington, D.C. with a bunch of people carrying loaded guns, I guarantee you, the government is already planning to put agent provocateurs in there to start shooting up the place to create a huge incident which can be used to suspend our constitutional right to keep and bear arms. Thank you very much for the phone call, Susan. We're going to let you go here. Now, we've been talking about Monsanto, which is winning all of these amazingly bizarre court decisions to basically say Monsanto has the right to the processes of life itself is really what it's coming down to. Monsanto can patent life-producing, self-replicating products. They're patenting life itself. We were talking about Nestle is trying to patent the fennel flower, even though obviously they did not create it. It's a product of nature. It's just completely out of control. There is now a huge fight brewing down in Mexico regarding corn. Corn is very important to the Mexican people. It's a staple of their diet. They have a long tradition of maize, the natural variety of corn, as part of their cultural history. Monsanto is down there trying to bribe its way into forcing their GMO products onto Mexico. We have the United States State Department is part of this campaign to force Monsanto's GMO products even on those nations that do not want it. They're already kicking up a huge fuss over the fact Peru is banning GMO. And I understand why this is being done. If the entire world is brought onto Monsanto's GMO crops, Monsanto will have monopolized all food production, and every nation on earth will be dependent on Monsanto and the United States for their continuing food production. And it may be that this destruction of the honeybees is not an inadvertent side effect of GMO pollen, but was actually intended all along to remove from the people a natural growing product to force them to buy one provided by a corporation. There was a story that came out today about how smoking marijuana appears to successfully treat Crohn's disease without any side effects. But they're not going to want to let you grow your own cure for Crohn's disease in the backyard. Heck, no, you have to go down to that pharmacy and you have to give them your money for a product. And that's the model, to destroy all alternative sources of your food and medicine to make you dependent. And there's nothing new with that. When the Christian missionaries first went down to Tahiti, and they went down there with the agenda of destroying that place as a paradise, because following the mutiny on the Bounty, everybody was saying, I want to live there. Lots of naked women running around. You don't have to work. There's fish in the ocean, fruit on the trees. You just lie on the beach all day long. Why wouldn't you want to live there instead of slaving away in the factories in Great Britain? When we come back from this commercial, I'll give you a little bit more history about the destruction of Tahiti and why it's possibly being repeated today. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And a quick reminder, I'm also going to be doing John Stadmiller's show here on RBN for the next 2 hours after we close this one out. Quick story about Tahiti. Following the mutiny on the Bounty, which was all about the breadfruit that was growing all over Tahiti, and you didn't have to work. You'd grab a fish, you'd grab a breadfruit, you'd just lie on the beach all day, chase the girls around. Paradise on earth. And the money junkies in Great Britain together with the organized religion, literally set out a plan to destroy this paradise on earth. They went down there, they introduced the Tahitian king to alcohol, got him hooked, got him to sign over the property to the church and the plantation owners, and then they cut down and destroyed all the breadfruit trees. So for the Tahitians to eat, they had to accept jobs on the plantations. And that's how the model works. Destroy your ability to take care of yourself, to make you dependent on the money junkies, the government, the church. And that's how the same scam is played out throughout history. They don't want you to be able to grow your own food. They don't want you to have your own money. They don't want you to have your own power generation. They need you dependent because dependency is slavery. That's why the July 4th holiday is called Independence Day. It's not called Freedom Day. It's not called We Kicked the British Butt Out of This Country Day. It's called Independence Day because it's the day the American people were no longer being forced to be dependent on the British East India Company, the Bank of England, the British government itself. That's what independence means, the right and the means to care for yourself as you see fit. And the money junkies hate that, and they will do whatever they can to prevent you from having the means to care for yourself here. All right, excuse me, we're coming up here on the top of the show, and somebody basically wrote in a real quick comment about Windows 8, chastising me for my view that the tile interface and this attempt to make your smartphone and tablet look like your desktop was the problem. Basically saying that Windows 8, because it is so cloud dependent, that a lot of people are starting to reject that concept. And I do as well. They're trying to take us back to the old model of mainframe giant computers owned by the corporations, and the device you have on your desk, in your hand, in your briefcase, is nothing more than a content and product delivery terminal. And they're trying to go back to that. I absolutely reject that. I want my data under my control. I will not use the cloud. You are a fool if you do, because once it's on the cloud, it's open season for every government and corporation to come in and look at what you were doing. Look at what the IRS was just caught doing with medical records. So, anyway. All righty, let's see. Anything else here to talk about? Very bizarre story. This is coming out of newsforge.com. In South Carolina, parents are suing a hospital for apparently performing a sexual assignment surgery on a toddler that they later adopted. Why did they even do this? Well, because there's money involved, I guess. All right, that's it for my show. We're going to take a quick break. I'm going to be back on the microphone here for John Stadmiller's show following the station identification.